Hey people, get ready to crush everyday TOEFL iBT tests for all modules and make your dreams come true. I'm your motivator and I'll be guiding you through the test prep videos. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe or you'll be missing out on some serious preparation.
Conversation 1. You will hear a conversation. A female student visits the University Career Center to meet with a career advisor before applying for a summer marketing internship. The conversation takes place in the advisor's office during a scheduled appointment. First, you have some time to look at the 5 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions. Excuse me, I have an appointment with Mr. Chen at 2 o'clock. I'm Emma Larson.
Hi, Emma. I'm Marcus. Come on in and have a seat. So, what can I help you with today?
Well, I'm applying for a summer internship at a marketing firm downtown, Clearfield and Associates, and I really want to make sure my application materials are as strong as possible. I was hoping you could take a look at my resume.
Absolutely, that's what we're here for. Do you have a copy with you?
Yes, I printed one out. I've updated it since last semester, but I'm not sure if the format is right for a marketing position specifically.
Okay, let me take a look. I see you've listed your coursework at the top. For an internship in marketing, employers generally want to see your relevant experience and skills first. Your academic background is important, but it shouldn't be the first thing they read.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought listing my courses would show that I have the relevant knowledge.
It does, but in a competitive field like marketing, practical experience stands out more. I'd suggest moving your work experience and projects sections above your education section. You've got some solid entries here, your social media campaign project for your business communications class, for instance.
I was actually a little unsure whether to include that since it was just a class project.
Definitely include it. Especially if you can quantify the results. Did you track any metrics, engagement rates, follower growth, anything like that?
Actually, yes. We increased the Instagram following for a local nonprofit by about 40% over 6 weeks.
Perfect. That's exactly the kind of detail that catches an employer's eye. Include that number. Concrete achievements make your resume much more compelling than vague descriptions.
That makes sense. I'll add that in. I also wanted to ask about the interview process. I've never had a formal interview before, and honestly, I'm pretty nervous about it.
That's completely normal. A lot of students feel that way. We actually offer mock interview sessions here at the Career Center. You can sign up to practice with one of our advisors, and we'll give you feedback on your answers and your presentation.
I didn't know that was available. How long does a session usually take?
About 45 minutes to an hour. We try to simulate the real thing as closely as possible. We'll even ask you industry-specific questions for marketing roles.
That sounds really helpful. Is it easy to get an appointment, or is there usually a long wait?
Honestly, this time of year it gets pretty busy because a lot of students are applying for summer positions. I'd recommend booking as soon as possible, maybe even before you leave today.
I'll do that. One more thing. Do you think I should include a cover letter even if the internship posting doesn't specifically ask for one?
In most cases, yes. A well-written cover letter gives you an opportunity to explain why you're interested in that specific company and how your background makes you a good fit. For a firm like Clearfield and Associates, I'd research their recent campaigns and reference one or two of them to show genuine interest.
That's a great idea. I actually follow them on social media, so I'm already familiar with some of their work.
Even better. Use that. It'll make your letter feel personalized rather than generic. Alright, so to summarize, reorder your resume to lead with experience, quantify your achievements, book a mock interview soon, and write a targeted cover letter. Does that all make sense?
It does. This has been really helpful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good luck with the application, Emma. Feel free to come back once you've made those revisions.
That is the end of the conversation 1. You now have some time to answer the questions. Conversation 2. You will hear a conversation. A male student visits the university health center because he has been experiencing persistent headaches and fatigue. He meets with a nurse practitioner who evaluates his symptoms and provides recommendations. The conversation takes place in an examination room. First, you have some time to look at the 5 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Hi, I have an appointment with Dr. Nguyen. My name is Jason Park.
Hi, Jason. I'm Lisa Gwynn. Come on back. So, what brings you in today?
I've been having headaches almost every day for the past 2 weeks, and I'm also really tired all the time. I thought maybe it was allergies, but the antihistamines I picked up at the pharmacy don't seem to be helping at all.
Okay. Before we figure out what's going on, I have a few questions. Are the headaches in a specific location, or more of a general dull pain?
Mostly at the front, like behind my eyes and across my forehead.
And when do they tend to come on? Morning, afternoon, after meals?
Usually in the afternoon, around 2 or 3 o'clock. Sometimes they're still there in the evening.
I see. How much sleep are you getting on a typical night?
Honestly, maybe 5 hours? Sometimes less. I've had a lot of exams and papers due this month.
And are you drinking enough water throughout the day?
Probably not. I mostly drink coffee to stay awake.
That's actually quite significant. Caffeine can cause dehydration, and dehydration is one of the most common causes of tension headaches, particularly the frontal type you're describing. Combined with sleep deprivation, that would explain most of your symptoms.
So you think it's not allergies?
It's possible there's a mild allergic component, but based on what you've told me, I believe lifestyle factors are the primary issue here. The antihistamines wouldn't do much for dehydration-related headaches.
I guess that makes sense. I've just been so stressed with finals that I didn't really think about it.
I understand. It's a very common pattern we see here. I'm going to recommend a few things. First, try to drink at least 8 glasses of water a day. Second, limit your coffee to 1 or 2 cups in the morning only, not in the afternoon. And third, and I know this is hard during finals, try to get at least 7 hours of sleep each night.
7 hours feels impossible right now. I have 2 more finals next week.
I understand the pressure, but sleep is actually critical for memory consolidation and cognitive performance. You might actually do better on your exams if you're well rested than if you study all night.
I've heard that before, but it's hard to believe when I feel like I haven't covered all the material yet.
That's a very common feeling among students. But chronic sleep deprivation impairs concentration, reaction time, and recall, the exact skills you need during an exam. I'd also suggest stopping by the Student Wellness Center. They run stress management workshops that some students find very helpful during finals week.
I didn't know the Wellness Center offered that. Are those free?
Yes, they're included in your student health fee. I'll give you a brochure before you leave. Now, I do want to check your blood pressure and temperature just to rule out anything else, but I don't think we're looking at anything serious.
That's a relief. I was starting to worry it might be something worse.
I can understand that. Persistent headaches can feel alarming, but in a student your age with this particular pattern, lifestyle factors are almost always the culprit. Let's take a quick look. That is the end of the conversation too. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 1. You will hear part of a lecture about architecture. Gothic cathedral design. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to examine the structural and aesthetic innovations that defined Gothic cathedral architecture, which emerged in 12th century France and spread throughout medieval Europe. What distinguishes Gothic architecture most immediately from its Romanesque predecessor is the pointed arch, a deceptively simple form that fundamentally changed how builders could distribute weight. Instead of the thick, heavy walls you see in Romanesque structures, Gothic builders could now channel the downward thrust of a vault outward and downward along a much more precise line of force. This engineering shift gave rise to 2 defining elements, the ribbed vault and the flying buttress. The ribbed vault consists of a skeleton of stone arches, called ribs, that intersect at the crown of the ceiling. These ribs collect the load of the ceiling panels and direct it to specific points on the wall rather than distributing it evenly, which meant that the wall between those load points no longer had to bear weight. Architects could therefore cut enormous windows into those walls. And to handle the lateral thrust those vaulted ceilings still generated, they devised flying buttresses, exterior arched supports that leap from the upper wall across an open span to a heavy outer pier. If you've ever seen Notre Dame de Paris from the outside, you've seen this system in full operation. Now, all of this engineering was in service of something deeply symbolic. Gothic cathedrals were conceived as representations of the heavenly Jerusalem, structures that were meant to dissolve into light. The enormous stained glass windows that the new structural system made possible were not merely decorative. They functioned as theological texts for a largely illiterate congregation, narrating biblical stories in colored light. The abbot Suger of St. Denis, widely credited with commissioning the first truly Gothic structure in the 1140s, wrote extensively about how the colored light filtering through the windows could elevate the soul toward the divine. So light was not a byproduct, it was the whole point.
Student, Professor Hartley, you mentioned that the ribbed vault directs weight to specific points. Does that mean the areas of the wall between those points are essentially non-load-bearing? Is that why they could put in such huge windows?
Exactly right. The ribs act almost like a cage or skeleton, and once the load is channeled to those discrete piers, the infill wall between them becomes, structurally speaking, redundant. Builders essentially replaced that infill with glass, sometimes nearly floor to ceiling in the clerestory level. Chartres Cathedral, for instance, has over 2,600 square meters of stained glass. That would have been unthinkable in a Romanesque building with its meter-thick load-bearing walls. So yes, the structural innovation and the luminous aesthetic are directly and inseparably connected. Let me also touch briefly on the vertical emphasis of Gothic interiors, because it ties everything together. The pointed arch is inherently more vertical than a semicircular arch, it draws the eye upward. When you add tall, slender piers, soaring nave heights, and vertical window tracery, the cumulative effect is one of intense verticality. Historians sometimes describe this as an architecture of aspiration, literally pulling the worshipper's gaze, and ideally the spirit, upward toward heaven. In a building like Beauvais Cathedral, which pushed the limit to a nave height of roughly 48 meters before part of it collapsed, you can see just how far medieval builders were willing to push this aspiration against the very limits of structural possibility.
That is the end of the lecture 1. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 2. You will hear part of a lecture about psychology. Memory consolidation. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
So last week we covered how memories are initially encoded, how sensory input gets transformed into a neural representation in the first place. Today I want to talk about what happens after that initial encoding, specifically the process called memory consolidation. Consolidation refers to the biological and psychological processes by which a newly formed, fragile memory trace becomes stable and resistant to disruption over time. Without consolidation, memories would remain vulnerable, easily erased by a knock on the head, a distraction, or simply the passage of time. Researchers typically distinguish 2 levels of consolidation: synaptic consolidation, which happens at the level of individual synapses within the first few hours after learning, and systems consolidation, which plays out over days, weeks, or even years and involves a reorganization of where in the brain the memory is stored. Let me start with synaptic consolidation. When you learn something new, neurons that fire together begin to strengthen their connections through a process called long-term potentiation, or LTP. This involves the synthesis of new proteins at the synapse, the junction between 2 neurons, which physically remodel that connection to make it more efficient. This protein synthesis is critical. If you block it pharmacologically in animal studies, the animal can form a short-term memory but cannot consolidate it into a long-term one. The memory seems to exist for a brief window and then simply disappears. This is why cramming the night before an exam and sleeping only 2 hours is not a great strategy, and I know some of you are guilty of that.
Student, Professor Ose, you mentioned sleep. Does sleep actually play a specific role in consolidation, or is it just that rest in general helps?
Excellent question, and the research is quite clear on this. Sleep itself plays an active and specific role, not just passive rest. During slow-wave sleep, the hippocampus, which is the brain structure most associated with the initial storage of new declarative memories, replays the neural activity patterns from the day's learning. Think of it almost like a file transfer. The hippocampus is a temporary holding area, and during sleep it repeatedly reactivates those memory traces and transmits them to the neocortex for longer-term storage. This is the core of systems consolidation, the gradual transfer of memory storage from the hippocampus to distributed cortical networks. Patients with hippocampal damage, like the famous case of HM, could not form new long-term declarative memories, but their older memories, those already transferred to the cortex, remained largely intact, which is powerful evidence for this two-stage model. Now there's a more recent and frankly fascinating complication to this picture called reconsolidation. For decades, researchers assumed that once a memory was consolidated, it was stable, locked in place. But experiments beginning in the late 1990s showed that when you reactivate a consolidated memory, essentially, when you remember something, it becomes temporarily unstable again and must be reconsolidated. During that window of instability, the memory can be modified or even disrupted. This has profound implications. It means that every time you recall a memory, you are not just playing back a fixed recording, you are potentially rewriting it. Eyewitness testimony research connects directly to this. Witnesses who are repeatedly questioned or exposed to misleading information may genuinely incorporate those inaccuracies into what feels like a vivid, authentic memory. There are also therapeutic angles being explored. If a traumatic memory can be reactivated and then disrupted during reconsolidation, for instance, by administering certain drugs or by pairing reactivation with extinction procedures, it might be possible to weaken the emotional charge of the memory without erasing its factual content. Some early clinical trials for PTSD treatment are exploring exactly this pathway. It's an area where basic neuroscience and clinical application are advancing together in a genuinely exciting way.
That is the end of the lecture 2. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 3. You will hear part of a lecture about anthropology. Tool use in primates. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Alright, let's pick up where we left off in our unit on primate cognition. We've talked about social learning and communication, and today we're turning to what many researchers regard as one of the most compelling markers of cognitive complexity, tool use. Now, tool use was once considered a uniquely human behavior, so much so that early definitions of our species, Homo sapiens, were framed around it. The anthropologist Kenneth Oakley famously described man as the tool maker. That assumption was dramatically overturned starting in the 1960s when Jane Goodall observed wild chimpanzees in Gom, Tanzania, not only using tools but actually modifying natural objects to make them more effective. What Goodall witnessed was chimpanzees selecting twigs, stripping them of leaves, and inserting them into termite mounds to extract termites, a behavior now called termite fishing. This was not instinctual foraging, it required selecting an appropriate material, modifying it, and using it in a planned, goal-directed way. When Goodall reported this to the famous paleoanthropologist Louis Leakey, his response was striking. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans." That quote encapsulates the paradigm shift this discovery triggered in both anthropology and primatology.
Student, Professor Nwosu, is termite fishing the most sophisticated tool used documented in chimps, or have researchers found other examples since then?
Great question. The field has expanded enormously since Goodall's initial observations. We now have a rich catalog of tool behaviors across chimpanzee populations that varies by region, which itself is significant, because it suggests cultural transmission rather than purely genetic programming. West African chimpanzees in places like Bosso, Guinea, have been documented using stone hammers and stone anvils to crack open oil palm nuts. This is a two-component tool system, using one tool as a surface and another as a percussive instrument, and it requires understanding the mechanical relationship between the two objects. Young chimps observe adults performing this task for years before attempting it themselves, and success rates improve with age, which is consistent with a learning and practice model. Beyond chimpanzees, we see tool use in other species as well. Orangutans in Borneo and Sumatra have been observed using branches to test water depth before crossing, and captive orangutans have figured out how to use stones to chip flint, accidentally reproducing early stone knapping techniques. Even more surprisingly, Capuchin monkeys in Brazil's Caatinga region use heavy quartzite stones to crack seeds and dig for roots. Capuchins are New World monkeys, which means they are far more distantly related to humans than chimps or orangutans are, suggesting that tool use has evolved independently multiple times in the primate lineage, what biologists call convergent evolution. What makes tool use theoretically significant for anthropology is what it reveals about underlying cognitive capacities. Effective tool use, especially tool manufacture, requires several things: the ability to represent a future goal state, causal understanding of how one object can affect another, inhibitory control to resist simply eating the food you're working to extract while you prepare the tool, and the capacity for social learning to transmit the behavior across generations. These are the same cognitive building blocks underlying human technology, language, and culture. So studying tool use in non-human primates isn't just about cataloging interesting behaviors, it's a window into the evolutionary origins of human cognition itself.
That is the end of the lecture 3. You now have some time to answer the questions. That is the end of the TOEFL iBT listening test. You now have some time to review your answers.
Hey people, how was your test? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious fun. See you tomorrow!